Joining us, we have staff writer at The Atlantic, David Graham, Rick Stengel, and James Semple are back with us. So let's start with the L.A. mayor's race in the Golden State here, since the president is right now focusing his ire there. He posted just a short time ago that it is not possible for Spencer Pratt to have lost the L.A. runoffs after the big lead he had. So what he's talking about is the current lead of L.A. City Councilwoman Nithya Raman. Between the two of them, Karen Bass is already advancing. And to be clear, they are still counting votes, and Pratt has never had the lead in official updates over Mayor Karen Bass. So, Rick, you've watched a lot of elections in a lot of countries around the world. Is the delay in California just how they normally allow that state's voters to cast their vote?
Well, they have a complicated system where if somebody does a mail-in vote that is mailed before actual election day, it can be counted over the next 7 days. They have other belt and suspenders maneuvers to try to kind of count every vote. It's a system that is based that it's more important to make sure every vote is valid rather than do it quickly. You know, Trump has this like 9-year-old boy sense that, oh, if we don't have the result on election night, there's some kind of fraud. You'd think the quicker the result, the more likely there would be mistakes, and the slower the result, the more likely they would count. Plus, it's an anomaly in our history. I mean, it's only a relatively recent phenomenon where elections were called on that night. You know, throughout the 19th century and early 20th century, it took weeks or days or months to call elections. So we need to have a better system. People need to message better. California needs to message better. It could be quicker, but it is not evidence of fraud at all.
How about some of the election fraud claims you've heard about, James? Go through them, fact-check them for us. What have you heard?
Well, with respect to Donald Trump, the way you can figure out whether there is, and I use air quotes here, fraud in an election is he losing or is his preferred candidate losing? That is the sole criterion for whether or not an election is fraudulent or rigged. And this goes all the way back to the Iowa caucuses in 2016. When he lost, his immediate move was to say that the process was rigged, that it was flawed. And it speaks to what Rick said in the last segment, which is to say that, you know, he refuses to acknowledge objective defeat when that is the case. The reality here is that the Republicans, because of Donald Trump, have been on a sustained attack against mail-in voting since at least 2020. So if you tell your supporters over and over and over again, don't vote by mail, don't vote by mail, voting by mail is fraudulent, and then you act surprised when the votes that come in and are counted from the mail-in vote don't go your way, that is a combination of delusion and a self-fulfilling prophecy mixed into one.
David, we have been hearing some version of the so-called big lie, the line about election fraud, which has yet to be proven in any fashion for, at least 6 years now. Are we reaching a point where it is part of the playbook of American politics, or is there a point where the electorate starts seeing through these unfounded claims? And by the way, given Trump's overall low approval ratings, is it already happening? Are people beginning to just sort of tune out and say, oh, yeah, election fraud again?
Yeah, and I think the reception for these kinds of claims is already heavily polarized. I do think people start to tune out on it. You know, you can claim fraud a couple times, but eventually it does become part of the wallpaper, and it no longer has the same impact. You know, I think also, I want to say we in the press can do a better job sometimes of making clear, you know, votes are not coming in, they are being counted. There's no official count until there is an official account. These are things that we could talk better about. But, you know, the blame also goes past Trump. You know, we saw then Speaker Paul Ryan suggesting there might be fraud when California was slow to count its votes in the 2018 midterms. So this has been across the board a Republican Party effort to cast doubt on the results when the results don't go their way.
So when you talk about the media doing a better job, I mean, like what? Because do people sort of tune out? Are as many people as the four of us here and our loyal viewers as interested in the nitty gritty, you know, and how things play out?
Well, I think about on election nights, for example, the way results are sometimes communicated. And we talk about them as though this is the votes coming in. This is as they're coming in. And in fact, all these votes are counted more or less at the same time. And the official results often don't come, you know, we don't get an official result sometimes for weeks, even in a election where there's a called winner and where unofficial results come in. when you talk to election officials and when you talk to election scholars, this is something they really worry about, is that voters just don't understand the way that the system works. And I think they are getting a better understanding. I think a lot of people have done a good job of explaining that to them as Trump's claims of fraud have become more amplified. But I also think, and I would say I'm guilty of this sometimes too, we have sort of shortcuts or we gloss over the process. And explaining that can be really helpful to people to understand why, for example, a delayed result isn't any indication of fraud at all.
So, James, you have the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, which says it has opened multiple fraud investigations into the election. This is into California's system, and it cites, quote, some serious infrastructure vulnerabilities, right? So does that set off alarm bells for you? Because the question is there a risk something could be found?
Well, there's always a risk that something could be found. And that would, if something is found and it's legitimately a problem, then we should take that seriously. Sure. But assertions are not evidence. And so the U.S. Attorney's job is to investigate crime. When the U.S. Attorney for Los Angeles says structural vulnerabilities, what he's referring to there, at best, even taken at its most generous euphemistic interpretation, is a critique of state policy. You can have reasonable people can and do disagree as to the manner in which California conducts its counting process. That's a reasonable debate to have, but it's not evidence of fraud. It's not evidence of a crime. And a federal prosecutor standing in the counting room while the counting is happening is posturing in order to create a predicate and then make an announcement based on the posturing, and that becomes further predicate. That's not evidence. It's not actually how we conduct criminal investigations.
So, Rick, how do Democrats counter-message all of these doubts that Trump and Republicans are sowing?
To David's point, I think the press has to do a better job in explaining how elections work. Elections also have to be more transparent. They are more transparent now than they used to be. But every state, and of course, election law is local and state. Right. To your point, you can change the law. There are some states where absentee ballots or mail-in ballots have to arrive and be postmarked actually before the election. That's an interesting idea. That would short-circuit what California is doing. It's probably worth having a sort of national commission. But letting voters understand how the process works, letting them see it. I've been an election monitor twice because I wanted to see what it was like. I wish everyone could see what I saw, which is that everything is incredibly buttoned up and stabbed, so that there's almost no possibility of fraud. And of course, the instance of fraud that has been examined by Republicans and Democrats over the last 10 years is a tiny percentage of 1%. So people should be able to see that for themselves.
The outcome. Yeah. Sounds to me like the idea for a really good documentary then. Let's watch how it all works. Let's see who wants to get that one going. Rick, I'd like you to stay with us, please. David Graham and James Semple, thank you both so much.